When the lights of Studio 6B first flickered on, the audience saw what they expected. A Hollywood legend, radiant and poised, gliding onto the stage with all the grace of a queen. Every hair perfectly in place, every word rehearsed to near perfection. She smiled and laughed, the epitome of charm and sophistication. Viewers believed they were witnessing a genuine personality, an icon of the silver screen. But Carson, ever the keen observer, saw past the glitter. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense before she even set foot in the studio. Her requirements, sent in a meticulously detailed memo weeks prior, were exhaustive. Lighting had to be at a specific angle, cameras positioned just so. The temperature of the studio, a very precise 67 degrees, not a degree more or less. The height of Carson's desk, the placement of chairs, all dictated in writing. Even the show's award-winning makeup team was replaced by her personal artists who arrived hours before taping. Everything was controlled, a producer recalled. She was a perfectionist to the point of cruelty, and cruelty it was. When a young production assistant, barely 20 and fresh to the industry, accidentally entered the dressing room with a glass of water, it triggered an eruption that would be remembered by every staffer present. The actress allegedly called the girl a brainless little fool, mocking her naivety and suggesting she find work somewhere that valued incompetence, like a brothel. Carson's producers tried to intervene, insisting the assistant would not be fired. The tension remained palpable throughout the entire taping. Carson, for all his warmth and patience, struggled to maintain a connection on air. Every laugh, every answer, every gesture from the Ice Queen had been rehearsed to near perfection. There was no spontaneity, no authenticity, just a performance layered upon a performance. During commercial breaks, her smile vanished entirely. She would sit stone-faced, ignoring everyone in the room, only to spring back to life the moment the red light signaled a return to air. Interviewing her was like speaking to a beautifully carved statue, Carson confided later. Marble, elegant, but hollow inside. Despite the professional veneer, the backstage chaos left an indelible impression on him. He saw in those few hours the cold calculation that others had overlooked. Years later, when a memoir from the EI actress's adopted child revealed allegations of emotional abuse, Carson's friends noted that he merely nodded. "I saw who she really was in those few hours," he reportedly said. "I believe every word." Even though she captivated audiences with charm and poise, Carson never forgot the malice that emerged in private. It was the contrast between the public image and the hidden cruelty that cemented her position at the top of his blacklist. The Ice Queen wasn't just difficult. She was, in Carson's eyes, a person who wielded her fame and beauty as tools to manipulate and intimidate those she deemed beneath her. As the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Carson's reflection was simple, yet cutting. The world adored her. But he had seen the truth, and in his private ledger of human character, she was a star whose brilliance could not conceal the darkness within. Even as he smiled for the camera, Johnny Carson's mind was already moving forward, preparing for the next guest, the next revelation, the next person whose public persona masked a far more disturbing reality. And if the Ice Queen had unnerved him, he knew the next name on his list would push him even further into the shadows of Hollywood's hidden cruelty. On stage, he was magnetic. Every time he appeared on The Tonight Show, the audience was enthralled by his effortless charm, easy laughter, and tales of Hollywood glories. Johnny Carson, ever the consummate host, played the perfect foil, respectful, amused, ready to laugh at the right moment. To viewers at home, the dynamic seemed effortless, cordial, even friendly. But behind the cameras, the story was far darker. The man in question was known as a gentleman, a legend with decades of fame and adoration. Yet for Carson, the veneer of charisma hid a deeply troubling side, a side that thrived on intimidation, control, and subtle menace. Staff members described The atmosphere during his appearances is almost suffocating. He would arrive with an entourage that seemed more like bodyguards than assistants, filling the studio with a presence that felt impossible to ignore. These men were not part of the entertainment world. They were enforcers, observers, and occasionally a source of fear for anyone caught in the wrong position at the wrong time. On one particular night, the tension in the studio reached a peak. A floor manager, a Korean War veteran in his 50s, had given the standard 3-minute warning before his segment. The guest, displeased, grabbed the man by his tie, pulling him close, and hissed a command that left no room for misunderstanding. "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I decide." The veteran froze, visibly shaken, as Carson watched from his monitor, heart pounding in disbelief. In that moment, the usually calm host considered canceling the segment entirely. Only the insistence of his producer, reminding him of the ratings draw this man brought, kept the cameras rolling. It wasn't just public displays of intimidation that unnerved Carson. During commercial breaks, the man would make cutting, demeaning remarks about staff members within earshot, jokes about appearance, competence, and intelligence that left no one feeling safe or respected. Carson, known for his tolerance and professionalism, finally broke his usual detachment. One such comment about a young female assistant drew a cold, sharp rebuke. "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The guest was momentarily taken aback. No one, not even Johnny Carson, had ever called him out in such a way. Reliability was another issue. He would cancel appearances at the last minute, sometimes when already in the building, claiming he simply wasn't in the mood. The crew, trained for chaos and unpredictability in show business, could barely keep up. It wasn't arrogance alone. It was a weaponized sense of entitlement that spread tension like a slow poison through the studio. Yet, when the red light returned, the charm returned with it. Jokes were told, stories spun, music played, and the audience, blissfully unaware, cheered and laughed as though nothing had happened. This duality, the public hero, the private tyrant, made him unforgettable, but not for the reasons the world believed. Carson's private assessment was unflinching. This guest wasn't merely difficult or moody. He was a bully whose power extended beyond the stage. He manipulated, intimidated, and controlled, testing boundaries that others rarely survived. For Carson, the experience left a lingering unease, a mark on his ledger of human character that would never be erased. After the show, Carson confided to Ed McMahon, voice tight with suppressed frustration, "I don't care what the ratings are. Limit him to once a year, maximum." That was significant. Carson rarely intervened in guest scheduling and almost never restricted appearances outright. For him to impose a limit for a man of such fame spoke volumes about the depth of his disdain. As he reflected on the duality of charm and menace, Carson realized something profound about Hollywood itself. The very qualities that enthralled audiences often masked the worst human instincts. And for every man or woman who dazzled in the spotlight, there was sometimes a darkness that only a few would ever glimpse. A darkness that Johnny Carson saw and quietly documented in his private ledger, far from the public eye. To audiences, she was elegance personified, a star whose every movement seemed choreographed for the silver screen. Her voice, soft yet commanding, carried warmth that drew viewers in, while her smile suggested charm, kindness, and a gentle nature. On The Tonight Show, she appeared effortless, funny, and self-aware. Johnny Carson, a master of gauging personality, knew how to guide interviews so that even the most nervous guests shone. But with her, the script quickly fell apart backstage. From the moment she arrived, the diva of deception exhibited behavior that left the production team on edge. Her list of demands was long, precise, and seemingly unending. Exact camera angles, specific lighting moods for every reaction, even particular instructions for the positions of furniture and props. Her makeup and wardrobe teams were not just a preference. They were a requirement, insisting on handling every detail themselves, disregarding the veteran staff already on set. But it wasn't the logistics that unnerved Carson. It was the way she treated people around her. Crew members recalled that even minor mistakes sparked intense verbal attacks. One production assistant, tasked with adjusting a chair slightly out of place, was berated with a tirade that lasted minutes. She reportedly shouted about incompetence, mocking the young staffer in front of others, then demanded their immediate dismissal. Carson's producers, shielding their team, refused. Tension simmered through rehearsal and taping, forcing Carson to maintain his iconic composure on air despite his growing frustration. What unsettled Carson most was her ability to switch personas at will. On stage, she was luminous, witty, graceful, perfectly in control. Off stage, her veneer dropped instantly, replaced by cold calculation and biting sarcasm. One producer remembered, "It was like she had two separate personalities, one for the camera and one for the people who served her. You never knew which one you'd get at any moment." Carson's instinct for authenticity clashed sharply with her carefully constructed illusions. He tried to connect with her, probing gently for sincerity, attempting to elicit moments of vulnerability. But each effort was met with polished deflection, rehearsed laughter, or glances that reminded him she was performing, always performing, even in private. By the end of taping, the host confessed privately to Ed McMahon that he felt like he had spent hours interacting with a living puppet. Later, when stories surfaced about her manipulative behavior off camera, staff whispered that Carson had been right all along. From the treatment of assistants to the relentless control over every minor detail, her on-screen persona had concealed a deeper, more ruthless character. For Carson, it confirmed an unpleasant truth he had seen too often. Hollywood's golden facade frequently masked a cold, calculating, and sometimes cruel individual. And yet, she commanded admiration and accolades. Audiences adored her, critics praised her, and the media celebrated her wit and elegance. The dissonance between public adoration and private cruelty was staggering, and it placed her firmly in Carson's mental ledger of people he could not respect. The diva of deception was not merely difficult. She was a master manipulator whose intelligence and charm were used as tools of control and intimidation. As the applause faded and the studio emptied, Carson reflected quietly. It was this duality, this ability to charm while simultaneously wreaking havoc behind the scenes, that marked the truly dangerous stars of his era. She had dazzled millions. But Carson had seen behind the mask, and what he saw was chilling. Even as he prepared for the next guest, he couldn't shake the lingering impression of her calculated cruelty. If the diva of deception had mastered charm as a weapon, Carson knew the next person on his list wielded influence in an entirely different, more overtly threatening way, one that would test both his patience and his moral judgment. On camera, he was genius personified, a maestro of his craft whose performances left audiences awestruck. Johnny Carson, a lifelong appreciator of talent, had the utmost respect for his skill. On the Tonight Show stage, he praised him graciously, asked insightful questions, and allowed his art to shine. But backstage, the manipulative maestro revealed a side that few ever saw, a man who wielded his brilliance like a weapon. From the dope moment he arrived, tension filled the studio. His entourage was large, composed not only of assistants but handlers whose sole task seemed to be enforcing his whims. Even minor deviations from his expectations, a misplaced prop, a slightly off-tempo cue, would trigger sharp criticism, often directed at the young production staff. One camera operator recalled, "He didn't just correct you. He humiliated you in front of everyone with words that made you question why you'd even chosen this industry. Carson observed these interactions with a mix of fascination and unease. He had interviewed countless stars, but the manipulative maestro's combination of brilliance and cruelty was rare. It wasn't merely temperamental behavior, it was calculated. Every gesture, every comment, every moment of disdain seemed designed to assert dominance, to remind everyone of their place beneath his genius. The most striking incident occurred during a rehearsal. A young assistant, nervous and inexperienced, misread a cue. The maestro, without warning, shouted over the music, causing the assistant to freeze, frozen in panic. He then berated her with an intensity that left even veteran crew members silently recoiling. Carson, monitoring from his office, considered intervening but hesitated, knowing the spectacle was about to unfold on stage. On camera, the performance was flawless, the audience none the wiser, but off camera, the damage was palpable. Carson later confided to a producer, "Talent doesn't excuse cruelty. Watching him operate behind the scenes, it's disturbing." The host had always believed in nurturing talent and protecting those working under him. Here, however, his patience was tested. The maestro's manipulation extended beyond intimidation. He would charm, apologize superficially, then resume the same controlling behavior once the crew's guard was down. It was psychological domination, executed with surgical precision. Despite the troubling behavior, he was a draw. Ratings soared during his appearances, and Carson knew the network would never dare blacklist him. But privately, he documented everything, a ledger of behavior that he could never erase from memory. The manipulative maestro's genius was undeniable, yet for Carson, it was inseparable from the suffering inflicted on those who supported him. Years later, when anecdotes of his backstage cruelty emerged in memoirs and interviews, Carson's response was measured. "I saw it all," he told a friend. "The brilliance on stage is real, yes, but the damage behind the scenes is also real, and that's what most people don't see." By the time the lights dimmed and the studio emptied, Carson had made up his mind. The manipulative maestro was someone whose art could inspire millions, but whose personal character earned him a place on the host's private blacklist. It was a stark reminder that fame and talent could easily mask darker human instincts, and that even the brightest star could cast the longest shadow. As he prepared for the next guest, Carson knew the pattern would continue. Some stars wielded charm, others intimidation, others genius. But the common thread was a disconnect between public adoration and private cruelty. And the next person on his list would demonstrate a particularly disturbing combination of both, forcing Carson to confront the unsettling reality of Hollywood's golden age. To the public, he was charisma incarnate, a silver screen legend, whose every word seemed carefully chosen to charm, captivate, and delight. Johnny Carson, who had interviewed countless celebrities over 3 decades, had learned to appreciate talent when it truly deserved it. On stage, the silver-tongued schemer appeared witty, urbane, and utterly captivating. He smiled, joked, and shared anecdotes that had the audience laughing in unison. Yet behind that sparkling exterior lay a side few ever witnessed. From the moment he stepped into the studio, Carson sensed a subtle tension. The schemer was meticulous, insisting on small details being executed perfectly, from the lighting on his hands during a gesture to the exact phrasing of a question. Staff members described a peculiar form of intimidation, not the overt rages or tantrums of other stars, but a constant, simmering assertion of dominance. Every compliment carried an edge, every joke a test. One crew member recalled, "He'd smile at you, but it was the kind of smile that made you question if you'd just been insulted or flattered. You were never sure." Carson, usually unshakable, found the schemer unnerving. It wasn't that he was difficult in the conventional sense. It was the psychological gamesmanship. During a rehearsal, a young floor manager made a minor mistake. with the cue cards. The schemer approached with a polite nod, whispered something incomprehensible, and walked away. Moments later, the manager realized that everyone in the room had caught the veiled criticism. It was subtle, indirect, yet devastating in its effect. Carson observed silently, realizing that the charm he displayed publicly masked, calculated, manipulation that spread fear and uncertainty among the crew. It wasn't only psychological. He occasionally crossed into verbal cruelty, particularly when addressing less experienced staff. One young assistant attempting to correct a wardrobe mishap was met with a series of biting remarks about her intelligence and career prospects. The schemer's words were polished, almost elegant in their execution, but the impact was harsh. Staffers later admitted they were afraid to make any mistakes in his presence. Carson, who prided himself on nurturing young talent and protecting those around him, found this behavior intolerable. Yet he understood the stakes. This guest was a ratings magnet, and network executives would never consider limiting his appearances. Carson had to maintain professionalism on air, smiling and playing the gracious host, even while his private ledger of observations filled with notes of calculated cruelty, manipulation, and intimidation. During commercial breaks, the schemer's persona slipped slightly, revealing glimpses of the man behind the public facade. He would lean on a staff member, whispering with a sly smile, and observers noted the subtle mockery hidden within the tone. These moments, though fleeting, confirmed what Carson had already suspected. The public saw brilliance and charm. He saw strategy, control, and manipulation. After the taping, Carson confided privately to Ed McMahon, "I've seen geniuses, I've seen divas, I've seen tyrants. But this man uses charm like a weapon. It's astonishing and frightening." Even as the audience applauded and left the theater, oblivious to the drama behind the scenes, Carson knew the truth. The silver-tongued schemer was more than a celebrity. He was a master of psychological manipulation, and he earned a permanent spot on Carson's mental blacklist. For Johnny, fame and public affection could never excuse cruelty, and the dichotomy of charm and menace was something he would never forget. As the lights dimmed and the studio emptied, Carson prepared for the next guest, aware that his private ledger was filling faster than ever. The next star, he knew, would bring an entirely different brand of darkness, one that went beyond manipulation or intimidation and plunged into something even more disturbing. On the surface, he was the epitome of charm and brilliance, a performer whose talent seemed limitless, whose presence could light up a room and captivate millions. Johnny Carson, always appreciative of skill and artistry, approached his interviews with respect and curiosity. On camera, the tyrant of talent was everything the audience loved, funny, engaging, and effortlessly charismatic. But off camera, he was a different person entirely. From the moment he arrived at the studio, the tension was palpable. The tyrant had an entourage larger than most movie casts, each member appearing to guard his comfort, his ego, and his moods. Staff members described him as controlling in subtle and insidious ways. A suggestion here, a critique there, each one laced with an authority that made even seasoned professionals uneasy. Carson watched silently, recognizing a familiar pattern he had seen with other stars, brilliance coupled with cruelty. One particularly alarming incident occurred during rehearsal. A young production assistant, new to the business, misplaced a prop that was integral to the guest's planned performance. The tyrant erupted, berating her in front of multiple crew members with a ferocity that was shocking for its precision. He didn't just yell. He calculated every word, every inflection, to maximize humiliation while maintaining an appearance of decorum. The assistant reportedly fled, shaken and near tears, while the crew froze, unsure how to intervene. Carson, monitoring from his office, felt a rare surge of anger but remained composed, knowing he could not let the show descend into chaos. It wasn't merely intimidation that defined the tyrant's backstage persona. He was relentless in testing boundaries, creating situations that forced others to scramble under pressure. His demands were unreasonable, yet cleverly disguised as necessary for artistic perfection. One cameraman recalled, "He made you feel like you weren't doing your job, even when you were doing everything right." It was exhausting, mentally, emotionally. Despite this, he knew how to perform in front of the audience. Every line delivered, every joke landed, every smile calculated to elicit warmth and admiration. The dichotomy was staggering. A man capable of making millions laugh while terrorizing a small group behind the scenes. Carson, who had spent decades understanding human behavior, found it disturbing, a reminder that fame could amplify not only talent, but cruelty. Even when the tyrant left the studio, his presence lingered. Crew members whispered about the incidents, sharing stories that mirrored those Carson had already documented in his private ledger. He didn't just see the cruelty, he saw the method, the strategy, the calculated use of status and skill to dominate others. This, he realized, was a dangerous combination: brilliance paired with unchecked ego and an appetite for control. After the taping, Carson confided to Ed McMahon, voice low but firm, "He's brilliant, yes, but brilliance doesn't excuse terror. I've seen what he does when no one's watching, and it's not right." It was rare for Carson to allow personal judgment to enter public commentary, but behind closed doors, his assessment was unflinching. The tyrant of talent had earned his place on the private blacklist, a person whose public image of charm and skill was only half the story. As the audience cheered and the studio lights dimmed, Carson knew that the ledger of dark personalities was far from complete. The next guest would push boundaries in an entirely different way and force the host to confront yet another unsettling truth about the hidden darkness of Hollywood's golden age. On screen, he was a vision of effortless wit and sophistication, the kind of guest who made every joke seem spontaneous and every story resonate with charm. Johnny Carson, who had interviewed countless stars, understood talent, charisma, and timing better than anyone. But even he, with decades of experience, found himself unsettled by the elusive enigma. From the moment he arrived, the studio felt different. There was an energy that was hard to define, a quiet tension that crept through the crew like a shadow. Unlike other stars whose dominance was loud or aggressive, the Enigma's control was subtle, psychological, almost invisible. He had mastered the art of influence, a smile here, a glance there, a comment spoken softly that could leave a staffer second-guessing every action. Carson recognized the danger immediately. A telling incident occurred during a rehearsal for a segment that should have been routine. A floor manager attempted to provide a minor correction on the script, suggesting a small timing adjustment. The Enigma smiled politely, nodded, and said, "Interesting, but perhaps you're not seeing the bigger picture." That single remark, delivered with seemingly casual charm, left the manager anxious and embarrassed, unsure whether he had done something wrong or simply failed to meet an impossible standard. Staff members recalled that the Enigma's mastery of subtle manipulation made everyone feel off balance, constantly questioning their competence. The elusive Enigma's charm was part performance, part psychological strategy. On camera, he was effortless, engaging, and magnetic. Behind the scenes, however, he leveraged that charm as a form of quiet intimidation. One production assistant, asked to adjust a microphone stand during a musical performance, accidentally misaligned it slightly. The Enigma approached, complimented her enthusiasm, then whispered an almost imperceptible critique so cutting that she reportedly froze, heart racing, unable to respond. Carson watched, horrified at the precision with which the Enigma wielded influence. It was cruelty disguised as civility. Carson, accustomed to handling demanding stars, noted that this type of subtle domination was more difficult to counter. The elusive Enigma left no overt scars, but the cumulative effect on crew morale was